Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and you're listening to EP Talk, the place where emergency physicians, aka ER docs, come and talk about things that are important to us, and both professional and personal sometimes. And in this case, new products and innovations. You've heard me say this many times before, but in the last 25 years of EPM, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of emergency physician inventors and startups who looked at what we did and said, I think I've got a better way to do this. And we've had an opportunity to help them promote their products and distribute their ideas and challenge them. And my guest today is Bill Lear, and he has an interesting product that we'll get to in a minute. But I want to hear more first about Bill and a little bit of your past. Bill, can you tell us that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Mark. So I live in Corvallis, Oregon right now on the beautiful West Coast. But I was brought up in Newfoundland in Canada, actually. And before becoming a dermatologist and a skin cancer surgeon, I was an emergency room doctor in Toronto, actually, during SARS-1. So I worked in the ER from 2000 to 2004. And I will echo that being in the ED is definitely mandates that you're an entrepreneurial person. In Toronto, I would often, MacGyver things together and whatnot. Right. And I actually think that having an ER background was very important for the development of the products that I came up with later in my career.
So did you train in dermatology in Canada, or did you come to the States for that?
Yeah, so half and half. So I did medical school at University of Toronto, and then I did primary care at McMaster, which is kind of like an evidence-based, problem-based kind of like Mecca. And that was a real good experience. And then after primary care, I worked ER in Toronto. And then I went back into dermatology at University of Toronto. And then I did a Mohs surgery fellowship at University of Washington in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
And then from there, came down to Oregon. Like the first, I remember being in Seattle. Seattle was super rainy, but there was no snow. And I thought, like, what is this? No snow. I'm staying on the West Coast.
I actually got interested in emergency medicine when I went to medical school in Missouri. I grew up in Missouri and the Midwest, and had an opportunity to do a summer project in Bellingham, Washington.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And I tell you what, it's where I learned to sail. It's where I fell in love with the mountains. But I stepped foot into the Pacific Ocean out there thinking I could go swimming in the Pacific, and just about froze my foot off.
Right.
And I said, I can't live on the West Coast and look at water that I can't swim in without a wetsuit.
Right. Yeah. And you need like a 5-mil wetsuit here. Yeah.
And so I ended up in the East Coast, and now I am in Annapolis, Maryland. So we're on the opposite coast of one another. So, but tell me a little bit about this Hemigard. I looked at it and I went through your slide deck, and I thought, this is pretty obvious. This is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Tell me about what it is. First off, what is it?
Right. So this is actually a box of Hemigards right here. And so it comes as a package, and it's an adhesive retention suture device. And that's why we have the Hemigard ARS, adhesive retention suture. And so the idea behind it is that you can do a retention suture without ripping the skin. And also we think with improved perfusion. So the general idea behind it is that you take, if you're sewing like a leg or frail, how like frail elderly people, they get like solar purpura. And it's like sewing wet tissue paper.
Yeah.
Like I remember in the ED, like sewing of shin lacerations, because the shin is under a lot of pretension. They get that lack, 2 or 3 hours later, there's tons of edema. And I used to do like mattress sutures to try to close it up. But mattress suture would rip. And I was like chasing my tail to get it closed up. So instead what you would do is there's 2 strips per package. And we've got like the nice Hemigard logo on the back. And so what you would do is you would take this and you would peel the backing off. And then if this was my arm, I would stick it. In fact, what I'll do is I'll actually do it. So you would peel one part of it off. And let's say I'm going to use it on my arm.
Do
And
me a
this
favor
super,
and
yeah,
do me a favor and write, just use a pen
yeah.
and tell me where where the laceration is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll
When I
do like
saw the,
surgery on
yeah, yeah,
myself.
there you
So
go.
let's say the laceration is right along here. And I
Okay.
even made it like nice and jagged.
Okay.
Maybe it's like a serrated knife or something. So you would take the Hemigard,
Okay.
put it like that, and then pull it off that way. Okay. So you see
Okay.
that?
Okay.
So you would then put one Hemigard on each side of the wound. And
Okay.
if you look, you'll see there's two holes.
Right.
And the two holes will accept the suture. And the design of the Hemigard is such that this advancing edge, the one that has the holes in it,
Yeah.
is quite stiff and rip proof. So you could practically hang a bowling ball from the end of this and it wouldn't
Okay.
rip. And then it has an intermediate zone that's stiff. Like when I try to pull on that, it
Yeah.
won't break. But then it has an end zone, and the end zone is stretchy. See that?
Oh, isn't that interesting?
So for years, like when I was doing surgery, so what I do in my daily work is I'll remove skin cancer, often from people's face, but from everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
everywhere. All skin on the body is at risk for skin cancer, and so we'll remove them everywhere. So like let's say I was doing a cancer on a shin. There's this trick, where people will sew through steri strips and plastic films and retention tapes and things like that. But all of them have their inherent weaknesses. So for instance, sewing through steri strips. I actually think sewing through steri strips was first documented in the ER literature. So what they'll do is they'll take steri strips and sew through that. The problem with sewing through steri strips is it's homogeneously stiff. And so then at the trailing edge, you get a blister because you get a shear injury at the back end. So
Gotcha.
what I did with Hemigard is I said, okay, I'm going to have, and actually what the patent on Hemigard is differential stiffness. So it has one end, the end closest to the wound is very stiff and rip resistant. Then it has a middle zone that disperses the tension away from the wound edge. We have really nice colorful pictures on the website. It's finite element analysis showing what that means. And then this end stretches so that when the wound is under high tension, like with a shin laceration, or I'll take these big cancers off ankles and then just close it under this gargantuan amount of force, this part here will stretch out so you don't get a trailing edge blister.
Fascinating.
So if we go back to our simulated laceration, I'll just put the other Hemigard down. So then you've got a Hemigard on each side of the wound, and you just sew simple interrupted on either side of it. If you wanted to do a vertical mattress, you could do a vertical mattress because there's two holes in it. But 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I'll just do a simple interrupted suture, and that opposes the two edges of the skin. And then if I want, I'll put a couple of deep sutures in there, and oftentimes on top, I'll then just glue it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is assuming all of the tension. For an elliptical wound, like I'm often making on people for melanoma and skin cancer, the middle of the wound, that initial suture is under 6 times the force of any subsequent suture. So when I do this on these wounds, like on shins and whatnot, when I put the Hemigard in and I close it, it's kind of like done.
Duh.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I'll have like an intern put a couple of sutures and then we'll just glue it, because by the time you put the Hemigard in a couple of deeps, you just glue the top. It doesn't need anything else. And it's been nice for COVID actually, because with COVID we try not to see people back for suture removal.
Yeah.
So instead, what the patient can do is they won't get ingrown sutures anymore because there's just one suture to remove, which is across here. They snip that suture, easy to pull the suture out, and then the rest of it is just glued.
Fascinating. So you've made it a one stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Fascinating. When I first saw that, I thought, oh, he's going to try to do the whole wound that way. And I thought that seems a little excessive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, nope, you're not really trying to do that at all, are you? You're just trying to take the I suppose you could put 2 if you had or you could put more if you had a larger wound. But the truth is you're really just trying to,
Right.
that initial wound pressure, the
Right.
wound margin pressure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I like to tell my residents, like I have a favorite way of, I'll say it when I have people interviewing, like for them, because I'm a fellowship director for a Mohs program. So like when I have fellows interviewing, I'll say to them, like, what's the point of a wound closure? Like, why are we doing a wound closure? And it's like, well, close the wound. And it's like, yeah, well, what's the operational definition? And so for me, the operational definition of a wound closure is that you're providing a temporary support to a wound to resist wound tension until the wound has sufficient inherent strength to withstand the forces placed on it.
Yeah.
And so temporary supports, that could be a suture, that could be a staple, that could be glue, the typical things that we use to close wounds. And there's been innovation around adhesive devices. There's like what's called the zip line, which is more used like in orthopedics, but I think some ERs got into it as well. And then there's like the new microneedle things like Bang Grip and Microman, but a lot of those work just on the surface of the skin.
Right.
And the stratum corneum turns over really, really quickly, especially in injured skin. And so there haven't been a lot of innovations that really address tension within wound closure. And so that's really what, I focused on. Like, kind of like to go back to the beginning of this. After I got into dermatology and Mohs surgery, when I was in my fellowship, I had a mentor, and he had developed medical devices. And I remember talking to him one day. He was like a liposuction guy. And I remember talking to him, and I thought, like how cool would that be to kind of come up with a medical device? And it always kind of stuck with me. And then I had written a textbook chapter on medical devices and suture materials for a dermatology book. And then I was holding my, so I had done all this, and then that chapter, I had just finished it. And so I had all these ideas about like wound healing and wound tension and sutures and wound strength acquisition, like how quickly, like those curves of like how wounds heal and like when they get their strength. And so anyway, I had just finished this, and I was holding my 3-month-old daughter, and I was like sketching, and it was like middle of the day. And I thought, like there's these bridges and devices that they use like in laparotomies, like, the big suture bridges used in laparotomies and stuff. And I thought, why aren't there things like that in derm? Because like for scalp wounds, like when I have like, it's like under gargantuan amounts of force, or shins, I was like, why aren't there like smaller things that like I could use?
Yeah.
And so I started sketching out different ideas. And so I came down and I said to my wife, like, I think I got an idea. What do you think? And so,
is she a physician as well?
She's actually a PhD in nursing.
Okay.
And so she was kind of like, well, let's see if anything is, been done like this. So we like did a patent search, and then I went to like a physician pitching event in Phoenix in September. So I came up with this idea in like May or June. And so then all summer I worked on like getting a provisional patent and all that stuff. And so then I pitched this, I went to this weekend thing for physician entrepreneurs, like pitch competition, and pitched like at 7 o'clock in the evening on a rooftop in Phoenix. And it was 107 degrees. and I was like sweating bullets, but we won that pitch competition. And so that was kind of a little, shot in the arm. But yeah, like, really, this is really literally a concept. A lot of times in entrepreneurship, you'll see people have a solution that's looking for a problem.
Right.
But for me, I had real problems of closing wounds under tension. And I thought, like, what's the simplest way for me to do something that helps me close those wounds, right? Yep. And the first device we had was actually a suture guard, which is like a small deformable suture bridge. And I use that mostly on scalp to stress relax skin. But I had this idea for a number of years. And this was informed also by like learning, like, because we did animal trials with the suture guard, and then I did clinical trials with the suture guard. And I found a lot of things out through that process. And we
Yeah.
didn't pivot, but we came up with this second product. But yeah, like, it really was born out of necessity because we were doing a lot. I mean, I was doing a lot of flaps on things. I was doing a lot of grafts on things. Like for lower leg, grafts are terrible. They
Yeah.
fail.
Yeah.
Flaps are a bad idea on leg because you don't have much blood supply. And so then, I was doing a lot of second intent healing, which is very unsatisfying. I just don't like it. It takes forever to heal.
One of the things I've noticed over the years with wound tension is that essentially you're making the wound not completely but relatively ischemic by the attention that's placed on the wound. And if you really want it to heal, you've got to have it. It has to be very gently put together. And that was the thing I found about Hemigard. I thought about it and I thought, well, all the tension is actually a centimeter or more away from the wound edge. And so you've got this injured tissue that is now gently approximated. And if you're going to do the slide deck that you sent, you had an example of a running subcuticular suture, and how that. And I thought about, I like those, but one of the problems I always had with them is the thought that I'm actually kind of creating an ischemic margin.
You are
by running this subcuticular suture, and I know that can't help with the healing, but also it probably also, when I've seen them in follow up, I've been surprised at that little thin line, how that little thin line ended up scarring and becoming a little bit more obvious. And one of the beauties of using glue is that it alleviates a lot of that. Okay. But it won't work when the wound margin is under tension.
Bingo.
And so you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place there. I can use the sutures and get a decent approximation, but it's going to scar heavier. It's going to be uglier. Heaven forbid, use a mattress suture. Who invented that?
Yeah, somebody who likes to strangle wounds. I really completely agree with you. Actually, I did a clinical trial a couple of years ago, unrelated to Hemigard, but we took elliptical wounds, like truncal and extremity elliptical wounds, and we did a split scar study on them. And so we did one deep suture in the middle, and in half the wound, we did only simple interrupted sutures. And with half of the wound, we spaced the interrupted sutures at about 4 millimeters apart, so fairly dense suturing. And on the other half, we did 9 millimeters between simple interrupted sutures.
Yeah.
And then we followed the people at 2 weeks for complications and 3 and 6 months for scarring. And the low density side, not only did they have less complications like edge necrosis and dehiscence, but they scarred better. There's like this old adage, right? Like blood supply before beauty. And I 100% agree with you. In that video, the subcuticular, I think I had used a barbed subcuticular. And I did that video really to appease to customers who like to use a running suture, because the wound closure is almost like economics. It's almost like the dismal science. Like there's a lot more opinion than science.
Exactly.
And that's what I learned in in really reviewing the literature of wound closure. There's a lot of data that could support any position, if you will. Even with wound aversion, there's great studies that show wound aversion works, and there's great studies that show wound aversion does nothing, right? and so you can kind of pick. It's almost like being on Facebook in 2020. You can pick your tribe.
I was just gonna say. We've certainly seen a lot of that on.
And it's like this. Like in derm, for instance, you'll have your people who are like, oh, it's almost malpractice to not do extensive undermining. And then you'll have your people like me who say, I'm not so sure about that, right? But yeah, I think if you've got an intradermal suture, like a running intradermal suture, I think it's that snaking back and forth. I don't see how If the wound is under enough tension that that's actually providing mechanical support, yeah, I don't think it's advantageous to the blood supply.
No, no.
And like you say, in order to do a good running suture, all of the tension has to have been relieved anyway. So why not just glue it? You see,
Yep.
and I think that's how ER docs, like that's the ER doc in me. That's me bringing ER to
Right.
dermatology.
Right.
Like it's just like when you're in the ED, things have to make sense, right?
Right.
And yeah, I don't know, but I'm
It,
with you on that. Yeah.
yeah. And if you take a wound like that, okay, and your option is a simple interrupted, or worse yet, a mattress or a vertical mattress
Mhm.
or something that's going to leave you with a railroad track scar.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, most girls, women are not going to want that at all. And you give them the option. You give them the option of gluing it and actually having a nice thin line. You're a hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
You not only have you don't have to suture it at all. You know,
Right.
you've taken a
Yeah.
wound that you can suture, that you don't, that you've taken a wound that you couldn't glue until you had
Correct.
this, and
Yeah.
you've not introduced any needles whatsoever,
Mhm.
and suddenly this complicated wound becomes a gluable wound.
Right. Yeah,
And
we really extend the scope of adhesives, if you will.
yeah,
So
exactly. That's what I was actually
yeah,
more succinctly said.
right.
You've
Yeah,
expanded the scope of adhesives.
right. And I am a massive fan of adhesives because it's like, you know, it's like building a house, right? So the Hemigard for the wound closure is essentially like the foundation of the
Yep.
house. And the glue is like the drywall and the paint.
Right.
And but you don't want to have a bunch of exposed studs, right? You want that finish to be
Right.
nice.
Right.
And and so you provide, see, I'm kind of a mechanical thinking person, which I think again goes back to my ED days, but like I just think like again, the purpose of the closure is to provide a temporary support.
Yeah.
And I think there's also a Goldilocks to it, you know, like you don't bring out a hammer like when all you need is a butter knife, right?
Yep.
And and so, you know, the Hemigard really provides that tension. We call it pressure offloading, but like it provides that offloading kind of like in the middle or wherever the wound needs it. And you intuitively know, like when you look at a gaping shin wound and you know, you kind of like, you know where the problem. So that's where you'd stick the Hemigard. And 9 times out of 10, when you put the first one down, the wound just kind of goes and it's aligned then. And so it almost like intuitively, at least my first reaction has always been, well, just get me some glue and I'll just glue it now.
Right.
Because if I had seen that wound before the Hemigard, I would have looked at it and said, oh, it's under no tension. I'll just glue it, you know.
Yeah.
So for the Hemigard, in terms of how long you could leave it on, it's FDA kind of like label is 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that's how long the strips can stay on. Um, um, but sometimes, I mean, so that's the company, right?
Yep.
Me as a surgeon, I've left it on a month. You know, and there's nothing magical that's going to happen like at
Right.
3 weeks or 4 weeks or anything like
Right.
that. But that's off-label, you know, use.
Have you found that the scarring is because the problem that I've always warned patients about is that when you first take these sutures out, you're going to have a nice little thin line,
Yeah,
and over the course of time, you're going to see that line become an ellipse as it
wider.
starts to stretch. And
Yeah.
have you seen by leaving it on longer that is lessened? There's less of that wound stretching.
You know, anecdotally, I think all of these have looked better to me. We have some scar studies that are going on right now. The problem with scars, as you know, is you've got to make these studies so long.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it is it's so interesting was because I had just done like that scar study, you know, a couple of years ago. And I tell my fellow and residents this, sometimes you get good results in spite of what you do, right? And so like sometimes you could take a person, do like simple interrupted or mattress sutures under tension on an extremity, just like terrible, and they have a good result.
Yeah.
And other times, you could do a better closure on another patient and like, oh my God, like how did they get a train track? I didn't even have a percutaneous suture in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you need, like for these scar studies, you need like 6-month follow-up and you need, a decent number of patients. So we're currently in the midst of doing, and the other issue that you get into with scar studies is because the Hemigard, for an elliptical wound at least, because the Hemigard, if you put the Hemigard in the middle, because it's relieved all the tension, you've effectively helped the non-Hemigard side, if you will. So we have some studies what we're embarking on now where we're going to do this in amputations. So with amputations, you get that big flap, from the bottom of the stump, like 6 inches long, and there's multiple tension points within that. So for half the wound, we're doing Hemigard, and for the other half, we're not doing Hemigard. And that's kind of like where we're going to get our scar data from. But anecdotally, yeah, me as a surgeon, yeah, I mean, they look really nice. Like I've seen some of these people back at like 6 months after we've done a wound that really on the leg was unclosable. I mean, I'm talking like, that on a shin. And they have a nice little linear scar. And I don't know how I would have done it in a linear fashion before, before that. I will say too, the strips are very good. Like I once put these strips on my hip when I was in Scottsdale. And I was in the pool for probably 2 or 3 hours a day and in the hot tub and everything. It took about 5 to 7 days for the adhesive to fail.
Okay.
But that being said, I usually tell people to keep the strips dry for at least 3 or 4 days. I essentially give them, how like with glue, like at least for me, like when I use Dermabond or another acrylate glue, I'll tell people to try to keep it dry for at least 3 or 4 days so that, they're not getting hydrolytic breakdown like too soon. Yep. And so I'll pretty much do glue recommendations for the Hemigard effectively. Yep. And so like if they are going to take a shower, kind of like protect it as much as they can, but like don't do like I did in the stress test, like don't go swimming in it and stuff like that. Interestingly, it's the same material. You know how like there's some diabetic appliances that are external and they use a tape.
Right.
So this is basically the same material as that. It's very hypoallergenic, and I, to date at least, and I've used this in hundreds of people, I haven't seen any contact dermatitis to the adhesive yet. But somebody has to be allergic, at some point. So it is a potential problem, but it's definitely been good, in that respect. So, but the one key thing I will say, about it is, part of the post-op thing for this is people should try to keep it as dry as they can, which is another great reason to glue with it.
Right.
Because it's so synergistic with glue, because the glue, like here's my pen mark laceration, the glue seals it. Yeah. So it's foolproof wound care. You just put a dry dressing on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly right. That's cool. Yeah. Well, now, okay, you've made a believer of me. Where do people that are listening to this podcast, where do they get Hemigard? How do they go about it?
Well, we've tried to make that easier too. Like, medical device companies are often very opaque with their pricing and with how to get it. And it's almost like you've got to have a secret number and call the rep and get the rep in. And then the rep's like, okay, sit down. You want to know the price kind of thing? We're pretty transparent with this. And in that way, I guess we're kind of innovative as well. So we have a website. It's sutureguard.com, and we have sutureguard.store. And whether you go to the website or sutureguard.store, it will link you to the store. So if you went to our website, which is Suturegard, SUTUREGARD.com, there's no U in the guard. And I could talk actually about why that is in a minute, but and that, if you go there, you could click on Buy Now, and then that will bring you to Sutureguard's store.
Okay, spell it one more time. It's
SUTUREGARD.com.
gotcha. Okay.
Like on the
There you go.
box here. And so if you go to sutureguard.com, you could buy now. So this is a box of suture guards, and so they're the exact same size as a box of suture. So like if you're in the ED or like
Yep.
I'm in my office, you could keep this along with your sutures, same size, exact same size box, same pack that you would have in a pack of sutures, and it comes with each comes with a pack of 2. They're ethylene oxide sterilized. You know, the expiry date on these is 2023. Made in by the way, all manufactured. The whole supply chain is the United States
That's cool.
for this device. So during COVID, right now, we have no supply chain issues for this. So you go to sutureguard.com, sutureguard.store. A box MSRP is $300. So one of these packages is $25.
Okay.
But you know, there's volume discounts and stuff, which I don't know
Sure.
anything about. But Jen, who's co-founder, she could speak to any of that. And so that's how you procure it. We recommend using a decent suture with it, you know, the retention suture that you would use
Sure.
with it. We actually sell a 2.0 nylon. If you're in an ER, you've probably got a contract, like an existing contract with probably Ethicon, but with whichever suture, you know, could be with McKesson or Cardinal or whoever it is, and they've got their sutures. But you know, we usually recommend using like a 2.0 nylon or a 3.0 nylon, like a nice beefy suture with it.
Yeah.
And there's no reason not to, because it's
Yeah.
really riding above the surface anyway.
Yeah.
And obviously using it on like, you know, a reverse cutting needle, like a 2/3 arc reverse cutting needle. But every ER would have
Sure.
a 2 or 3.0, you know, to use with it.
That's cool. That's incredible. That's finding a problem. You know, you have changed a fundamental problem here. Somebody with a large laceration that will not have to be sutured, will not have to be used. You know,
Right. Typical simple interrupteds and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. That by taking wound pressure off, you're able to glue things that otherwise you would have said, can't do it. Can't glue this.
Right.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I've done it on the face too. Like I had a woman had a big cancer right here. She's on blood thinners. Normally that we would do a flap, like we'd cut all the way across here and lift that flap, and lots of complications and stuff. And we used 2 Hemigards, pulled it together, glued it, done. You know, so yeah, I mean, it really is like a glue. It really is a glue extender in many ways, you know. And I'm such a glue fan. Like like you, I love glue. You know, so like in Dermabond, whichever acrylate glue, you know, you're using. And there's some of these new higher viscosity glues now that I'll use. But yeah. Oh, and why do I not have a U in the guard? It has to do with trademarks. So like these are all the things you learn as an entrepreneur, right? So like if you call this suture guard, let's say you want to trademark suture guard, SUTURE space GUARD, that would be then descriptive of what the product is. So good trademarks should not be descriptive. So like if I wanted to trademark this computer mouse, right, that would not be trademarkable because it's too descriptive of what it is. And so that's why like good trademarks are things like Google or like a book company called Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, that's not descriptive of what
of
they're
anything.
doing. So you want to have a name that's kind of descriptive, but yet, you know, messes up the letters and things like that.
Well, that's fantastic, and thanks a lot for joining us, and for all of our listeners, I recommend that you try this. I'm always excited about new ideas, but sometimes there are some reservations. I don't have any. I'll be honest with you, Bill. I do not have any reservations on this. In fact, this is going to actually change. I'm going to talk to the folks where I practice about acquiring this, because it would change how many people actually get needles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a whole lot of folks would be and it will actually speed things up.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh, it's so,
because you could,
the first couple of them, you know, you got to get used to putting the strip down or whatever else, and you know, and you've got to also make sure like the skin is dry. So like if I do like a HIBA cleanse prep, you kind of like clean that and you dry it and you put the strip down. If there's any hair, you want to like clip the hair before you put it down.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's super fast.
Interesting. That's great.
Really, really fast because you're dealing with the tension with this and then you're gluing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Bill. Thanks for joining us. And for all of our listeners, check it out. Suture Guard with no U, and try it out. I mean, it's simple enough. Trivox, and if your hospital's not doing it, do it yourself. You might find that you're speeding things up, and people are happy with you, and you could bring it to your facility. So, thanks for joining us. And this is EP Talk, and join us next time. Thank you.